I was sitting across from Diane in the HR office at Tech Vision Solutions, watching her cold eyes pierce through me like I had just committed some unforgivable crime. 7 years. 7 years I had given this company building their entire back-end infrastructure, from scratch, working weekends and late nights to make sure every single line of code was perfect. And now Diane held up a photograph of me standing outside the data core industries building their biggest competitor with a look of satisfaction on her face. She told me I was being terminated immediately for violating my employment contract. The word that stung the most: replaceable. After everything I had done, I was just replaceable. Before I tell you how I turned this betrayal into the most expensive lesson Tech Vision ever learned, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe, because what happens next will show you exactly what happens when a company underestimates the person who built their entire foundation. Trust me, you will want to see how this unfolds. Let me take you back 7 years to when I first walked through those doors. I was 25 years old, fresh out of grad school, with a master's degree in computer science and more ambition than sense. Tech Vision was just a startup back then, barely 30 people working out of a renovated warehouse in downtown Chicago. The CEO, Marcus, was one of those rare leaders who actually cared about people more than profit margins. He hired me as the third engineer, and together with 2 other developers, we built something incredible. Those early days were intense. I remember spending 70-hour weeks designing the database architecture, writing thousands of lines of code, debugging at 3 in the morning while eating cold pizza. But it never felt like work because we were creating something meaningful. Our platform processed financial transactions for small businesses, and watching it grow from handling 100 transactions a day to eventually millions felt like watching your own child learn to walk. Marcus trusted me completely. When I suggested we rebuild the entire payment processing system using a different framework, he gave me 3 months and full autonomy. That decision turned out to be the smartest thing we ever did. The new system was faster, more secure, and scalable beyond anything our competitors had. Within 3 years, Tech Vision grew from that small startup to a mid-size company with 200 employees and major clients across the country. I got promoted to senior software architect when I was 28. The salary was good, $130,000 a year, enough to rent a nice apartment downtown and start saving for a house. Life felt stable and predictable in the best way possible. I had built something that mattered, worked with people I respected, and felt genuinely valued for my contributions. Then everything changed 6 months ago, when Marcus decided to retire. He sold the company to a private equity firm, and within weeks, everything I loved about Tech Vision disappeared. The new CEO, Jonathan Prescott, was a man in his early 50s who spoke exclusively in corporate buzzwords and cared only about quarterly earnings. He brought in his own leadership team, including Diane Rothwell as the new HR director. Diane was 45, dressed like she stepped out of a corporate magazine, and had a reputation for being ruthlessly efficient at cutting costs. Her favorite phrase was optimizing human capital, which really meant firing experienced employees and replacing them with cheaper, less qualified people. The warm, collaborative culture Marcus had built evaporated overnight. Suddenly, we had mandatory time tracking restrictions on remote work and endless meetings about maximizing productivity. I watched as Diane systematically dismantled the team Marcus had assembled. Good people, talented engineers, who had been with the company for years, received termination notices with 0 warning. Their replacements were junior developers from overseas who worked for half the salary but had none of the institutional knowledge. When I pushed back on some of her decisions, especially when she tried to eliminate our health insurance benefits, Diane made it clear she did not appreciate my attitude. She called me into her office one afternoon and told me I needed to understand my position in the new organizational structure. The implication was obvious. I was an expensive legacy employee, and she was looking for any excuse to replace me with someone cheaper. But I refused to be intimidated. I knew my value. I knew that without me, half the systems would collapse within weeks. My closest colleagues started leaving one by one. They saw the writing on the wall and found better opportunities elsewhere. Each time someone gave their notice, Diane would smile and say something about fresh talent and new perspectives. I stayed because I still believed the company needed me, that my work mattered more than office politics. Then came that Wednesday afternoon in early November. I had scheduled a lunch meeting at a coffee shop in the Loop, the downtown business district. The cafe happened to be located on the ground floor of the same building that housed Datacore Industries, our main competitor. I was meeting Professor Chen, my former advisor from Northwestern University, who now taught computer science. We were discussing a passion project I had been working on during weekends, a free educational platform for underprivileged schools that needed better technology infrastructure. Professor Chen and I spent an hour talking about the technical challenges of building a scalable system that could serve thousands of students simultaneously while running on minimal resources. It was exactly the kind of problem I loved, solving something that combined technical complexity with genuine social impact. I showed him my initial designs and we brainstormed solutions over coffee and sandwiches. What I did not know was that someone from TechVision, probably sent by Diane, had followed me there. They took photographs of me entering the building, standing in the lobby, and leaving 2 hours later. To anyone watching without context, it looked like I was having a business meeting inside the offices of our biggest competitor. The next morning, Thursday, I arrived at work at 8:30 like always. My coffee was still hot when I saw the email notification. Urgent. Meeting required immediately. HR department. My stomach dropped. Nobody gets called to HR urgently, unless something bad is about to happen. I walked down the hallway to the HR suite, my mind racing through possibilities. Had I made some mistake on the last deployment? Was there a complaint from a colleague? I knocked on the door, and Diane opened it herself, which was unusual. Normally, her assistant handled these things. Inside the conference room sat Diane, and 2 people I recognized from the legal department. Nobody smiled. Nobody offered the usual pleasantries. The atmosphere felt like a courtroom, and I was apparently the defendant. Diane gestured to a chair across the table, and I sat down confused and increasingly worried. She placed a manila folder on the table between us and opened it slowly, deliberately, like she was revealing evidence in a murder trial. Inside were printed photographs. Me entering the building, me in the elevator lobby, me leaving, all timestamped from yesterday afternoon. We have evidence that you are working for our competitor. Diane said, her voice flat and accusatory. This is a serious violation of your employment contract and company policy. I felt my face flush with confusion and anger. Wait, what? No, I was meeting with my former professor. It was about a non-profit project, nothing to do with data core. Your contract explicitly prohibits any contact with competing firms, one of the lawyers interrupted. The location and timing suggest corporate espionage. That is insane, I said, hearing my voice rise despite trying to stay calm. I can show you emails, the project documentation, everything. This was completely innocent. Diane held up her hand. We have made our decision. Your employment is terminated effective immediately for violation of contract provisions regarding competitive activities. You will have 15 minutes to collect personal belongings under security supervision. I stared at her, unable to process what was happening. 7 years. 7 years of late nights of solving impossible problems, of building the infrastructure this entire company ran on. And now I was being accused of betrayal based on a photograph. This is wrong, I said quietly. You are making a huge mistake. The systems I built, the projects in progress, nobody else understands how they work. Diane leaned back in her chair with a small smile that made my blood boil. Mr. Ibrahim, you need to understand something. We have an entire IT department. You are not the only person who knows how to write code. Frankly, you are replaceable. We will be fine without you. That word hung in the air like poison. Replaceable. After everything, I was just replaceable. The rest happened quickly, like I was being processed through some dehumanizing corporate machine. Diane handed me a small cardboard box and informed me that 2 security guards would escort me to my desk. I had exactly 15 minutes to gather my personal items. Nothing from the computer. No access to files. My email had already been disabled, my Slack account removed, my security badge deactivated. Walking through the open office with a security escort felt like the most humiliating experience of my professional life. Colleagues I had worked with for years looked up from their desks, their expressions ranging from shock to pity to curious. Some people quickly looked away, afraid of being associated with whatever crime I had supposedly committed. Others stared openly, probably already speculating about what I had done to deserve this treatment. I reached my desk in the corner, the one with the view of the Chicago skyline that I had loved. My plant, a small succulent someone had given me 3 years ago, sat next to a coffee mug with the company logo. There were photographs of Sarah, my girlfriend of 5 years, and me on vacation in Colorado. A few technical books I had brought from home. I placed everything carefully into the box, aware that everyone was watching, aware that this moment would become office gossip within minutes. The security guard stood 3 feet away, making sure I did not touch my computer. or try to access any files. I wanted to say something to my team to explain what was really happening, but the words stuck in my throat. What was there to say? I was being thrown out like a criminal, and anything I said would just sound defensive. Walking out of that building into the cold November morning felt surreal. I stood on the sidewalk holding my cardboard box, the security guards watching from inside the glass doors to make sure I actually left. The city moved around me, people rushing to their own jobs, oblivious to the fact that my entire career had just imploded. I called Sarah from the sidewalk, my hands shaking. She answered on the second ring, probably expecting me to ask if we needed anything from the grocery store. Instead, I said I just got fired. They think I was working for a competitor. It is completely false. But they would not listen. Sarah was silent for a moment, processing. Then she said exactly what I needed to hear. They are going to realize they made a mistake. You are too good at what you do. This will work itself out. I wanted to believe her, but standing there in the cold with everything I owned from 7 years of work in a single box, it was hard to feel optimistic. The first few days were the hardest. I stayed home cycling between anger and despair. Former colleagues texted me privately, expressing sympathy and disbelief, but nobody was willing to speak up publicly. They were all scared of Diane, scared of being the next person escorted out by security. My friend Kevin, a senior developer who had worked closely with me for 4 years, sent me a long message saying how messed up the whole situation was, how everyone knew I had done nothing wrong. But he also said he could not risk saying anything official, because he had a family to support. I understood, but it still hurt. I started applying to other positions, reaching out to my network, updating my LinkedIn profile. But word travels fast in the tech industry, especially in a city like Chicago, where everyone seems to know everyone. I discovered that TechVision had put out some vague statement about my departure due to policy violations. Some recruiters who had been interested in me suddenly went cold. Others asked pointed questions about why I left, and when I tried to explain, I could hear the skepticism in their voices. Nobody wants to hire someone with a cloud of controversy hanging over them. By the end of the first week, I was seriously considering hiring a lawyer to sue for wrongful termination. But the consultations I had made it clear that employment law in Illinois strongly favored companies. At-will employment meant they could fire me for almost any reason, and proving defamation would be expensive and time-consuming. The lawyers all said the same thing. You might win eventually, but it will cost you tens of thousands of dollars in 2 years of your life. I felt trapped. My reputation was damaged, my career was stalled, and the company I had given everything to had discarded me like garbage. Sarah tried to stay positive, reminding me that I was talented and would find something better, but I could see the worry in her eyes when she looked at our budget spreadsheet. Then, on a Tuesday morning, exactly 2 weeks after I was fired, my phone rang. It was Kevin, and he sounded panicked. "Ibrahim, everything is falling apart here. You need to know what is happening." He explained that the database system had started throwing critical errors. Transaction processing was delayed by hours. Customers were calling to complain that their payments were not going through. The new IT team, mostly junior developers that Diane had hired to save money, had no idea how to fix it. They were trying different solutions, but each attempt made things worse. "They tried to reach you through your old email," Kevin said, "but obviously that is disabled. Diane is freaking out. Jonathan is demanding answers. Nobody knows what to do." I sat there listening, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and concern. Part of me was satisfied that they were finally realizing what they had lost. But another part, the part that had spent 7 years building that system, felt genuinely worried about the users who depended on it. Small businesses trying to process their daily transactions, people whose livelihoods depended on the platform working correctly. "What are you going to do?" Kevin asked. Nothing, I said. "They fired me, remember? They called me replaceable. Let them figure it out with their replaceable employees." We hung up and I sat staring at my phone. I knew what was happening technically. The database required regular maintenance, specific optimization queries that had to run on a schedule I had carefully calibrated. The architecture was complex, designed for maximum efficiency, but requiring someone who understood all the interconnected pieces. Without that knowledge, the system would degrade quickly, and any attempt to fix it without understanding the underlying structure would cause cascading failures. 3 days later, Kevin called again. "It is worse. Way worse. Their biggest client, Midwest Financial, is threatening to cancel their contract. That is $2 million. DataCore is already reaching out to our other clients, offering to migrate them. The tech blogs are starting to write about our problems." The stock price dropped 15% this week. I could hear the stress in his voice. Kevin was a good engineer, but he was not a miracle worker, and he was being asked to fix something he did not fully understand while the company burned around him. That afternoon, I got a call from a number I did not recognize. When I answered, I heard Diane's voice, and it was notably different from the cold, authoritative tone she had used 2 weeks ago. "Ibrahim, we need to talk." I let the silence stretch out, making her wait. Finally, I said, "About what?" There was a pause, and I could almost hear her swallowing her pride. "We may have been hasty in our decision regarding your termination. We would like to discuss bringing you back." I laughed a short, bitter sound. "Replaceable, right? That is what you called me. I am sure your IT department has it under control." Another pause. "We are prepared to offer you your position back, with a 20% raise, and a formal apology. I am not interested in being an employee again, Diane, but I will consider coming back as an independent consultant. What are your terms?" Her voice was tight, professional, trying to maintain some control over a situation that was clearly spiraling. I had thought about this moment during the sleepless nights of the past 2 weeks. If they were desperate enough to call me, they were desperate enough to pay. $2,000 per hour. Minimum billing of 10 hours per week. 3-month contract. Payment in full at the beginning of each week, non-negotiable. The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought she might have hung up. Then she said, "That is over $300,000 for 3 months of work. That is my offer. You have until this time tomorrow to decide." I ended the call before she could respond. Sarah looked at me with wide eyes. "Did you really just demand $2,000 an hour?" I did. "And they are going to pay it." The next morning my phone rang again. This time it was Jonathan Prescott himself, the CEO. "Mr. Ibrahim, I want to personally apologize for how this situation was handled. We accept your terms. All of them. We will also be providing a formal written apology from both myself and Miss Rothwell. I will need the first week's payment before I start," I said, "and the apology in writing before I sign any contract." "Agreed. Can you start Monday? I will let you know." That weekend I received a formal email from Diane. It was exactly what I had demanded: a written apology, acknowledging that the termination was based on incomplete information and that I had not violated any company policies. Every word must have been torture for her to write. I saved it, printed it, and framed it. Not out of spite, but as a reminder to myself about standing up for my value. Monday morning I walked back into TechVision, but this time everything was different. I was not an employee. I was a consultant. I had my own office, no time tracking requirements, no mandatory meetings unless I chose to attend. The junior developers who had tried to fix my code now sat in meetings with me taking notes as I explained what they had broken and how to fix it. It took me 2 weeks to stabilize the critical systems. I wrote detailed documentation, created training materials, and held workshops to transfer knowledge to the team. The transaction processing returned to normal. Midwest Financial decided to stay. The stock price recovered. By the end of the first month, TechVision was back on track. Diane and I crossed paths occasionally in the hallways. She would nod politely, but the arrogance was gone. Jonathan personally thanked me multiple times and hinted that they would love to keep me on permanently, but I had already made my decision. After 3 months, I completed my contract. The systems were stable. I had trained a competent team to maintain them, and I had documented everything thoroughly and professionally. TechVision offered to extend my consulting agreement, but I declined. The truth was, I had already accepted a position elsewhere. During those 3 months of consulting, word had spread through my professional network about what had happened. Not the version TechVision tried to spin, but the real story. Senior tech leaders at other companies reached out, impressed by how I had handled the situation. One of those conversations led to an offer I could not refuse. Chief Technology Officer at a rapidly growing fintech company, with a base salary of $290,000, significant equity, and the authority to build my own team from scratch. I accepted immediately. Looking back now, those weeks after being fired were some of the darkest of my professional life. I felt betrayed, humiliated, and genuinely scared about my future. The feeling of walking out with that cardboard box being called replaceable after 7 years of dedication cut deeper than any salary reduction could have. But gradually I realized something important. Being fired was not the catastrophe I thought it was. It was liberation. TechVision had changed into something I no longer believed in, a place where people were viewed as expenses to be minimized rather than assets to be valued. If Diane had not made that decision, I would probably still be there, comfortable but increasingly miserable, watching the culture deteriorate while telling myself I was too invested to leave. The termination forced me out of my comfort zone. It made me confront my own value in the marketplace, instead of accepting what one company told me I was worth. And ultimately, it led me to a much better opportunity than I would have found otherwise. Sarah was right that day on the phone. They did realize their mistake. But more importantly, I realized something about myself. I had spent years letting TechVision define my worth, believing I needed them more than they needed me. The truth was exactly the opposite, and it took being fired to see it clearly. I learned 3 critical lessons from this experience. First, never let a single company or person define your value. They can fire you, they can call you names, but they cannot take away your skills, your experience, or your ability to create value elsewhere. Your worth is not determined by one employer's opinion. Second, replaceable is just a word that bad managers use to control employees. The reality is that truly skilled people are never easily replaceable, and the market will prove it. If you are good at what you do, genuinely good, there will always be someone who recognizes that and is willing to pay appropriately for it. Third, sometimes what feels like the worst thing that could happen is actually the push you need towards something better. If I had not been fired, I never would have demanded $2,000 per hour. I never would have had the confidence to negotiate for a CTO position. I would have stayed comfortable and overlooked, slowly becoming more bitter as I watched my contributions be taken for granted. I do not hate Diane or Jonathan. They made a bad decision based on ego and poor judgment, and they paid the price for it. In a strange way, I am actually grateful to them. They gave me the wake-up call I needed, even if they did not intend to. Now, sitting in my office as Chief Technology Officer, I sometimes think about that November morning when I stood outside TechVision with everything I owned in a cardboard box. I remember the fear, the anger, the humiliation, but I also remember what came after. The moment I realized I had more power than I thought. The satisfaction of making them acknowledge my value. The confidence to demand what I was worth and walk away when something better came along. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you turns out to be the best thing that ever happened. You just have to be patient enough to see it unfold. Have you ever been in a situation where losing something you thought was essential turned out to be a blessing in disguise? Share your story in the comments below. If this resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel because I share more real stories about navigating career challenges and finding your true value. Share this with someone who might need to hear it today. Thank you for listening. And remember, your worth is never determined by someone else's inability to recognize it. Keep pushing forward and better opportunities will find you.